Nobody remembered his name on the morning he arrived. That was the point. He parked the old truck near the service entrance, the way he always did when he came like this, quietly, without announcement, without the black car and the assistant and the agenda that usually preceded him. He wore a faded green jacket, the kind with reinforced elbows from years of actual use. He carried a thermos. He signed in at the security desk under a name that was not his. And the young guard barely looked up. Marcus Webb, founder, architect, and silent majority shareholder of Webb Systems, walked into his own company as a stranger, and the company did not notice. It had been 31 years since Marcus built the first prototype in a rented garage with 2 employees, a folding table, and a debt that kept him awake until 3 a.m. most nights. The company was worth $11 billion now. It occupied a campus of 14 buildings in the hills north of San Francisco, all glass and steel and perfectly maintained greenery, where young engineers walked around with expensive coffee and the quiet certainty that they were changing the world. Some of them were. Most of them were not. Marcus knew the difference. He had always known the difference. That instinct, the ability to see clearly what others dressed in ambition and noise, was the reason Webb Systems had survived 3 recessions, 2 hostile acquisition attempts, and 1 catastrophic product failure that nearly ended everything in 2009. He had rebuilt it then, silently, working 18-hour days alongside the people who stayed when others fled. He never forgot those people. He never forgot what it cost them. But companies grow. And as they grow, they forget. The complaints had been small at first. A pattern in the anonymous feedback surveys, a word that appeared too often, repeated by too many voices who chose not to attach their names to it. The word was invisible. Engineers who had given years to the company feeling unseen. Maintenance crews who held the campus together being walked past without acknowledgement. A culture slowly dividing itself along invisible lines, those who mattered and those who were merely useful. Marcus read every survey. He read them at his kitchen table before dawn, in the same chair where he had read technical manuals 30 years ago. And when he finished, he set down his coffee and made a decision that surprised no one who truly knew him. He would go and see for himself. The campus groundskeeping team started at 6 in the morning. Marcus was there at 5:55, the crew supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Tomas who had worked the grounds for 11 years, looked at the unfamiliar face with mild suspicion. Marcus handed him a work order, legitimate, generated by a facilities system he still had access to under a contractor profile he had never deactivated. Tomas studied it, shrugged, and handed Marcus a pair of gloves. "You know how to use a leaf blower?" "I'll figure it out," Marcus said. Tomas almost smiled. Everyone says that. For 2 days, Marcus worked. He cleared debris from the walking paths. He pruned the hedges along the east corridor. He carried equipment, took breaks at the picnic tables where the maintenance crew ate lunch, and listened. He listened to Tomas talk about his daughter's college application. He listened to a young woman named Priya describe the mold problem in the basement of Building 7 that had been reported for times and ignored. He listened to an older man named George talk, without bitterness, about the executive who had walked past him every morning for 3 years and had never once said good morning. "You think he doesn't see me," George said, eating a sandwich, looking at the glass towers. "He sees me. He just decided I don't count." Marcus said nothing. He looked at the glass towers too, on the 3rd day. He saw it happen. A product meeting had overflowed into the outdoor plaza, a group of 8 or 9. Led by a director named Callum Reed. Callum was 34 years old. Harvard MBA, the kind of man who performed confidence like a sport. He had been promoted twice in 18 months, each time by passing engineers with longer tenure and deeper technical expertise. Callum walked through the plaza the way certain men walk through spaces they believe belong to them. He did not look at the groundskeeping crew moving equipment nearby. He looked through them, then his phone rang. He stopped. He held up one finger to his group, signaling silence. He took the call standing directly in front of the path Tomas needed to clear with the maintenance cart. Tomas waited, patiently, professionally. Callum spoke on the phone for 4 minutes without moving, without acknowledging Tomas, without the smallest gesture of awareness that another human being was standing 2 feet away, waiting. When Callum finally ended the call, he glanced at the cart and said, without looking at Tomas, "Can you move that? You're in the way." Not a question. A dismissal. Tomas moved the cart without a word. When he turned back, His face held the expression of a man who has learned to carry weight in silence, not because the weight is light, but because he has decided it will not break him. Marcus watched this from 30 meters away. He finished trimming a hedge. He put down his shears. He picked up his thermos. And he wrote 3 words in the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. He did not write Callum's name. He wrote the name of the engineer who came after. Her name was Celine Aslan. She had been with Webb Systems for 4 years. She was 29 years old and had designed a core component of the company's most profitable infrastructure product, a contribution that had been absorbed into a team deliverable. Her name appearing in the internal documentation, but nowhere in the public-facing credit. She had not complained. She had gone back to work, but on the 3rd afternoon of Marcus's quiet presence on the campus, Celine Aslan walked into a product review meeting and did something that very few people inside Webb Systems had the courage to do. She disagreed. The roadmap being presented was flawed. The flaw was technical, specific, and significant. The flaw, if deployed, would create instability in the system that would not surface for 6 to 9 months, by which time the cost of correction would be enormous. Celine had the data. She had run the simulations herself, at home, after hours, because something had not sat right with her, and she had chosen to find out why. Instead of letting it pass, she presented her findings clearly, calmly, with precision. Callum. Reed listened to 40 seconds of it. Then he cut her off. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when everyone feels something important is about to happen, but nobody wants to be the one to acknowledge it. Callum explained, with the careful patience of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow, that the roadmap had been approved at the senior level, that the timeline was locked, that raising this now was, to use his exact word, disruptive. Celine said she understood the timeline. She said she was raising it precisely because she understood what was at stake. Callum thanked her for her input. The meeting continued. 2 hours later, Celine received a calendar invite. Performance review. The following morning, mandatory. She did not tell anyone, but a colleague who had been in the room told someone else. And by evening, the story had traveled, quietly, through the channels that information travels when people do not trust the official ones, until it reached Tomas, who mentioned it during the end-of-day equipment check to the man in the faded green jacket standing nearby. Marcus listened. He asked one question. "What's her name again?" Tomas told him. Marcus nodded. He picked up his gloves. He finished the day's work. The next morning, the performance review did not happen. Celine arrived at the conference room to find it empty. No calendar notification of cancellation. No explanation. Simply nothing. At 10 o'clock, she received a message from the Chief Technology Officer's office, the man who ranked 3 levels above Callum Reed, requesting a direct technical consultation. The message referenced, specifically, her simulation data. It asked if she could present her findings to the engineering leadership team the following week. Celine sat at her desk for a long moment, then she opened her laptop and began to prepare. Marcus returned his equipment to Tomas on Friday afternoon. He shook the man's hand properly, the way men shake hands when they have worked beside each other and both know what that means. Tomas studied the older man's face with the quiet attention of someone who has spent years learning to read people in the moments before they reveal themselves. "You're not a contractor," Tomas said. It was not a question. Marcus looked out at the campus, the buildings, the glass, the paths he had helped maintain for 4 days. "I used to be," he said. "A long time ago." He walked back to his old truck. He drove out through the service entrance, past the young security guard who still did not look up, and onto the road that curved down through the hills toward the city. In the board meeting 3 weeks later, Callum Reed presented a revised roadmap. The revision had incorporated the structural corrections Celine Aslan had identified. Her name appeared, this time, in the executive summary. Callum did not mention how the revision had come to be. He did not mention the simulation data, or the late nights, or the woman who had been willing to stand alone in a room and speak a difficult truth to people who did not want to hear it. But at the head of the tables sat a man in a dark suit who had, 3 weeks earlier, worn a faded green jacket and cleared leaves from a walking path. And when the presentation concluded and the room began to talk, that man looked at the document in front of him for a long time without speaking. Then he asked one question. "Whose analysis is this?" The room answered with the kind of silence that contains more information than most answers. Marcus wrote one word in his notebook. Then he closed it. He never announced what he had done. He never called it anything. He sent no email, held no meeting, issued no statement about values or vision or the soul of the company. The people who needed to know understood. The people who did not need to know continued their days. But in the weeks that followed, something shifted inside Webb Systems in the way that deep things shift, not dramatically, not visibly, but with the quiet permanence of a foundation being reinforced. Callum Reed resigned 6 weeks later to pursue, as the announcement phrased it, other opportunities. Tomas received a facilities budget increase, the first in 7 years, along with a formal acknowledgement of the building's 7 maintenance requests that had been ignored for months. George, who had spent 3 years being invisible, was asked by the new interim director to serve on a campus experience committee. He attended the first meeting in the same clothes he wore to work. He sat at the table without apology. And Celine Aslan continued doing what she had always done. She went back to work. She wrote better code. She trusted, now, that someone was paying attention. The man who built the empire has no need to announce it. He simply walks through it sometimes, quietly, in clothes that do not demand recognition. He listens to the people others have learned not to see. He watches the place where character lives, not in the boardrooms, not in the presentations, not in the language of performance and ambition, but in the small daily decisions that accumulate, invisible and uncelebrated, into the kind of organization that either honors human dignity or slowly destroys it. He knows what he is looking for because he has lived on both sides of it. He has been the man who was invisible. He chose, deliberately and permanently, never to forget what that costs. And so he returns, sometimes in old clothes and worn gloves, not to inspect his company, but to remember who he built it for. The people who do not know who is watching. The people who do the right thing anyway.